I'm Aakash Singh Rathore, and this is my YouTube channel, Views, Reviews, and Interviews. You can find a great number of views that I express on this channel. Reviews, not so many. I'm working on that now, and interviews coming soon. Please do take a second just to click on the like button. That helps the channel grow a little bit, so we can get these sorts of reviews out amongst the intended audience. Today I will be reviewing Christophe Jaffrelot's well-known biography of Dr. Ambedkar, entitled Dr. Ambedkar and Untouchability, and subtitled Analyzing and Fighting Caste. As some of you know, I'm absolutely crazy about the cover art of this book. I've used the same picture when I discussed the Mahad Satyagraha in my book, Ambedkar's Preamble. I think it's just a very striking image of Dr. Ambedkar taking water from the tank. This book was published first by Columbia University Press in 2005 and then reprinted by Permanent Black in Delhi. And it's gone through a great number of printings. I think the one in my hand is the 19th imprint, so people really buy this book. What I'm going to discuss today a little bit is why I'm not entirely sure why that is, because I find the narrative of the biography a little bit troubling, and I'm going to explain what the book is about, what it covers, and why I find it problematic. So this is a biography, but it's really written from the point of view of sociology. So it's not so much an intellectual biography, and I appreciate that, but it is far more concerned with all of the issues of the discipline of sociology that unfold while narrating the life and times of Dr. Ambedkar. It's a very, very slim volume. The main portion of the text is just about 160 words, and that's divided over 9 chapters with an introduction and conclusion. So that's 11 sections. So these chapters are very, very short, and they really hold your attention. It's well written. But the total page count of the book is just around 200. That means there are 40 plus pages at the end, and if it's not text, what is it? Well, it is some of the most interesting endnotes that I think you can possibly find in a work on Ambedkar. And while I had mentioned I find the book problematic, and I'm not a great fan of it, I am a great fan of the footnotes, the endnotes, which I've read so many times. I think they're really informative, and they take the text in a way that is well beyond the main narrative of the book. I'm crazy about the endnotes of this text, and I prefer them to the book itself. If we look at the chapter breakdown, the first chapter is on Maharashtra between social reform and anti-Brahmin mobilization. So it discusses the wider context in Maharashtra, and in fact beyond Maharashtra, with a wonderful section introducing Mahatma Phule. And I think that this is really nice because it gives people readership of Jaffrelot's little book on Ambedkar, gives them a nice introduction to Phule and the significance of Phule in general and the impact that he had on Ambedkar in particular. I really like that part of the first chapter. The second chapter, Ambedkar, son of a Mahar soldier, really begins the biographical portion of the book, and in doing so, Jaffrelot relies fundamentally on Eleanor Zeliot's biography. And what's nice about that, I mean, if we tally for the biographical part of this book, if we tally where Jaffrelot, on what he relies to construct that narrative, it's more Zeliot than Keir. And this is something I really appreciate, because Keir is just packed full of mistakes and half-truths. in the construction of the life of Ambedkar, and Zeliot is far more diligent about double-checking sources. So it's nice that that Jaffrelot relies on Zeliot so heavily. That's not to say that there aren't some simple and sort of silly mistakes, like, and I'm not sure where they come from. They might come from Zeliot, I'll have to check it. But Jaffrelot gets wrong the amount of scholarship, for example, that Dr. Ambedkar received for his studies. He, for some reason, continues to refer to Ambedkar's book on the Shudras as being published in 1947, when, of course, it was published in 1946. And small things like this, but that's not too big of a deal. Chapter 3 on analyzing and ethnicizing caste is really a great chapter. And I think it's so good because, as I mentioned, this biography really comes from the point of view of sociology, and this chapter is more or less representing Dr. Ambedkar as the pioneer, originator of the sociology of caste. Sociologists today, of course, think that their discipline is ages old, but it's not. It's a very young discipline in its relatively recent branch off from philosophy in the 19th century. And so what we find is that Dr. Ambedkar is right there at the forefront of sociology in general, and the sociology of caste in particular. And so when you read people like Dumont or Anand Srinivas and so on, as Jaffrelot points out, you find so many of their ideas anticipated in Ambedkar. And so this is really a wonderful chapter from that point of view, from discussing Dr. Ambedkar's sociology of caste. There is a small issue, more for advanced people who are advanced in their understanding of Dr. Ambedkar, and that is about how Jaffrelot represents Ambedkar, like almost all of the secondary literature does, unfortunately erroneously, as rejecting the Aryan racialist theories surrounding Aryan migration and early India. Now, of course, in the Shudra's book, this is a fundamental axiom of Dr. Ambedkar. He captures this whole Aryan hypothesis as being generated in the context of Orientalist and colonialist discourses that serve to perpetuate a kind of racial hierarchy that was of use to imperialism. But later on, if we work through 1946, 1948, the Untouchables book, and we go towards the end of Ambedkar's life in Revolution and Counter-Revolution in ancient India, we find that Ambedkar actually revisits these issues of race in ancient India, in early India. And we find that he's far more amenable to understanding various distinct ethnic identities in ancient India between Aryans and non-Aryans, Dravidians, I mean, I'll make a separate video on this because it's quite complicated, and I see if you don't speak about this very carefully, people go a little bit crazy. In my elsewhere on my YouTube channel, you can find my lectures at JNU on riddles in Hinduism, where I'm discussing the Aryan hypothesis, and I use the term Aryan invasion. And people go mad that I use that term, because obviously we use terms now like Aryan migration or even transhumans. But this sort of nomenclature doesn't really impress me very much. The question is whether this different genetic material came or did not come. And Dr. Ambedkar, as we'll see later in life, changes his views from 1946 and 1948. So I don't blame Jaffrelot for not knowing this. It is a bit for people who are more into these different kinds of attitudes towards historiography on the part of Dr. Ambedkar and how they evolved. All of that aside, chapter 3 is really an excellent chapter. Chapter 4 then goes into the debate with Gandhi and the Pune Pact. It's a standard chapter, one of those standard Ambedkar and Gandhi rivalry chapters. I don't think it's, if you're not familiar with it, then it's a good read. Of course, the notes, as I had mentioned, are very good, and I think better than the narrative in the chapter itself. In chapter 5, so about halfway through the book, I think things start taking a little turn south, in my opinion. At least that's how I feel as a reader. Chapter 5 is called Searching for an Electoral Strategy, and it is a nicely written chapter. In fact, it's a brilliantly written chapter in terms of a historical tracing of the evolution of the various parties that Dr. Ambedkar founded and attempted to steer. The Labour Party, so ILP, and then the movement from ILP to the Scheduled Caste Federation, SCF, and the movement from SCF late in life to RPI, the Republican Party of India. And Jaffrelot has an interesting hypothesis, which is to put it very plainly and hopefully quickly, that the ILP was a kind of a party that focused more on labor and class, pushing down any kind of outright orientation towards caste, which allowed for a great deal of cooperation with other left socialists and so on, political parties. But then the Scheduled Caste Federation then prioritized caste and focused instead on coalition within the various untouchable jatis, which that not actually succeeding, then Ambedkar turns back in the formation of the Republican Party to a party that is capable of cooperating beyond caste distinctions to form larger coalitions with the left, and that's, I think that's an interesting argument, and makes some sense. The part that I have a problem with is the way that in what is represented as a biography, we get very little 360-degree look at the way that Ambedkar's strategies in these parties failed to materialize, or his electoral defeats and so on. And what Jaffrelot really concentrates on is taking a very hard look on the way that Dr. Ambedkar did not succeed as a political strategist. He did not succeed electorally. And that may be the case if we look at simply from the point of view of seats in assemblies and seats in parliament. But when we're speaking about a life, to just narrow down to that point of view about political electoral success, and having the entire chapter kind of narrate failure after failure, and grasp these failures or collect these failures into a thesis, which is that Dr. Ambedkar was really a failure in terms of electoral success, doesn't seem to be the right attitude to take in a biography, which should give you a far richer look at, all right, if this narrow aspect failed, what lessons can we learn from it in a broader sense for the future, or what can we see in terms of the simultaneous other fields or arenas where it led to successes. And obviously the clear point here is about social mobility. So there may have been electoral disasters, but there was a huge amount of social mobility at the same time. And in a biography, one would think that even if you want to talk about the electoral failures, given a 360-degree view on Ambedkar and his life and his mission and so on, one would spend ample time talking about the successes in terms of social justice, community awareness, self-awareness, social mobility, and so on, and instead of just harping on electoral failures. But maybe I'm just being oversensitive about that chapter, and Jaffrelot wanted to just take a hard look at this slice of things, and he does that with skill. The next chapter, chapter 6, is another one that I find starts to, lead it to sink downwards in the success of this biography. It's called Opposition or Collaboration: Ambedkar's Pragmatism and Resilience. Now, this is basically a kind of apology or defense against the sorts of attack you find from the likes of Arun Shourie that Ambedkar was a British collaborator or a British stooge. And the thing about this is that Jaffrelot doesn't really mention Arun Shourie in the chapter. He just presents a narration of the way that Ambedkar collaborated with the British, when and why, giving the context of how, when, and why. And he characterizes this collaboration as part of Ambedkar's pragmatism. And now this pragmatism is not so much the term of art of William James or John Dewey or Charles Peirce or whatever. It's articulated as a casual term, and as we know, when someone suggests that someone's decision was pragmatic, it can also hint at a kind of opportunism. And if we're trying to speak about Ambedkar's collaboration and saying he wasn't a stooge, he was pragmatic, well, this is fine if you're speaking to sympathizers of Dr. Ambedkar. But the likes of Arun Shourie are not speaking to sympathizers, right? They're speaking to those who are profoundly unsympathetic to Dr. Ambedkar's position. And Jaffrelot does nothing to counter those claims or that point of view. So, in a sense, what I find troubling about this chapter is that why do you even raise the issue if you're not going to shut it down properly? If you raise it and then skirt around it and refer to Ambedkar as pragmatic, then I don't really know why you even bother, because those of us who come in sympathetic to Dr. Ambedkar already know that that is false. That whole narrative is obviously false. Anyone who knows Dr. Ambedkar's life and work know that the narrative is false. So why drag it out from the dark shadows into the light and then not adequately treat it? So I find this very strange, what Jaffrelot chose to do here by putting that chapter in. The next chapter, Shaping the Indian Constitution, is a more or less standard account of the Constituent Assembly debates, but it does pick up that trend that began in chapter 5 on electoral strategy, that trend that Dr. Ambedkar never quite succeeds. So he talks about how Ambedkar never really manages to get his values and principles realized in the letter, the text of the Constitution. And once again, even though this is a biography, it's a little odd that there's so little account of what Dr. Ambedkar's, what's going on in his subjective experience at this time. I mean, there's so many things going on from his marriage, his new marriage, which proved to be very, very destabilizing and disturbing, not only for him personally, but for the wider community. Gandhi's assassination, which Ambedkar narrates in his own words that he was profoundly moved by in different ways, I mean, with chromatically different feelings, and all sorts of things going on in Ambedkar's personal life, and none of that is touched. And at the same time, if we're dealing with the Constituent Assembly debates just as such, this is obviously done much better by experts in the field. So this chapter is neither here nor there. It's neither really grasping those years from the biographical point of view, and neither is it really expertly explaining it from the point of view of jurisprudence or constitution making. The next chapter is called The Solution of Conversion, chapter 8, and this is really quite a very fine chapter as far as the sociological material is concerned. So once again, what Jaffrelot does is he the next chapter is chapter 8, The Solution of Conversion. So we're moving somewhat chronologically. You know, we began with the evolution of those parties, or let's say a bit back, the Pune Pact issues. So we've got very early 1930, and then the political parties going from 30 to the mid-40s, and then the chapter on the collaboration with the British. So, you know, that's his role in the Viceroy's Executive Council prior to independence, and then you have the Constitution period, and then you have the conversion period. So now we're at the late 50s. So there's a rough chronological trajectory here. And the part that I like about this conversion chapter is really the sociology. So there are kind of excurses on the impact of conversion on the Mahar and other Dalit communities, and from the point of view of sociology, this is quite interesting. From the point of view of biography, there's not much here, and when Jaffrelot is speaking as a biographer and not a sociologist, there's nothing really new to be found in the book, and that takes us to the last chapter, chapter 9, the impact and relevance of Ambedkar today. This gets, so I had mentioned that Arun Shourie is not really explicitly mentioned in the chapter of collaboration with the British. In this chapter he is, and so what Jaffrelot is doing in this chapter is kind of dealing with the main rivalries or antagonisms that Ambedkarites today face, whether it's from the side of Gandhians or from the side of people like Shourie and the right. And what Jaffrelot tries to do is sort of bring up the critiques, Gandhian critique of Ambedkar, for example, or the movement, and address them in some respects. And I don't think he addresses them particularly well. He's quite diffident about the position, as usual, as he has been all along, chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so I'm not entirely sure why he wants to raise these problems if he is not very confident about quelling them. And I think what you can see is, you know, that this diffidence of Jaffrelot that we find throughout the second half of the biography is really captured in a paragraph in the conclusion to the book. And I'll just read that conclusion, that one line from that conclusion. Ambedkar's strengths were those of his weaknesses. So in other words, the strengths that Ambedkar had were also the weaknesses that Ambedkar had. Nothing he achieved would have been possible without his strength of character, which was so manifest and explains his tremendous charisma. Unfortunately, his individualism and his very personal exercise of power adapted badly to organizational constraints. So you see this kind of diffidence. So his personal charisma and capabilities, which are strengths at the individual level, turn out to be weaknesses at the institutional level. Weaknesses in terms of electoral strategy, weaknesses in terms of being perceived as a stooge instead of a nationalist during his cooperation with the British, weaknesses in terms of his encounters in the Constituent Assembly, weaknesses in terms of failing largely to make great social impact with conversion, and so on and so forth. So I think this was what was behind, in the back of Christophe Jaffrelot's mind, that he has an ambiguous view on Ambedkar, and kind of comes out snowballing more and more as the biography progresses. Now, for these reasons, I really don't know why this is such a popular book. I do find the notes excellent, and I've read the book a couple of times, mostly for the notes. But from the point of view of a Ambedkar biography, or even, you know, it's not an intellectual portrait, which is nice, but what is it? It's like a sociologist's indictment of the failures of Ambedkar to succeed in one domain after the other. And of course, objectively, maybe it is true that we can take this from one point of view and look at his strategies as failures. But the reason that Dr. Ambedkar merits not one biography, but many, and much better than this, is because of the great impact that he had, because not only of his personal charisma, but the way that he managed to spread this revolutionary spirit that has far from died down today. In fact, maybe in India of today stands as one of the only hopes. And so I don't understand why there would be so much fixation on these on seeing it from the point of view of failure, instead of lauding, celebrating the triumphs, which were as many, if not more, than the failures, from another point of view. So that's my review of Christophe Jaffrelot's biography of Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar and Untouchability. I hope I wasn't too harsh. If you think I was unfair, you can leave some comments down below, and let me know what you think of the strengths of this book, or maybe counter-argue against what I called out as its defects, or its main defect. And I'll try to keep the reviews a bit shorter, a lot shorter in the future. I didn't want to unfairly criticize the book, so I thought it was an obligation to try to present its strengths and his side of things before saying critical remarks about it. Once again, let me know if you agree or disagree with these remarks, and please do leave a like, and if you want to see more videos, much shorter, then subscribe to the channel. Thank you.